To you who live overseas, American property is meaningless, isn't it? You have your grandparents' old shack, and that's enough for you.
After my mother passed away, I returned home for her funeral only to find out that my sister had already decided how to distribute the inheritance without consulting me. I was given the old house that my grandparents used to live in, with no say in the matter. When I went to see it, it was in such a state of disrepair that it was barely livable. Even if I wanted to dispose of it, it would cost a considerable amount of money. Still, I thought of it as my grandparents' house, which my mother cherished, so I started cleaning it up. And that's where I found something unbelievable. I'm a married woman in my 40s. My husband got a job overseas, so I went with him. My job is something I can do anywhere as long as there's an internet connection, so I didn't hesitate to go with him. I'm currently working as a freelancer. I have one sister who is also married and has a family. Her husband works in the suburbs, so they enjoyed living in the suburbs near his workplace. When both my sister and I got married, our parents were still alive, but our father passed away a few years ago. Our parents had a great relationship, and my mother was devastated by my father's death. Normally, my sister and I would have discussed what to do with our mother, but my sister took action on her own. My sister and I have never gotten along since we were children, and we've never cooperated on anything. My sister left her husband at home and came back to our parents' house. In effect, her husband became on a solo assignment. My sister started living with my mother in our parents' home. Although it might be normal for me, who cannot return to America, to offer financial support, we didn't even talk at my father's funeral. The decision to live together had already been made without my knowledge. My sister and I don't get along well, but that doesn't mean she and my mother are on bad terms. If they're doing well, I thought it was okay not to contact them. However, my mother became ill due to depression and died after a long battle with her illness. I hurried back to America to attend her funeral. I regret not seeing her again while she was still healthy. I regret not living with my mother when I returned to America. Even after the funeral, I couldn't escape from my sadness. Despite the fact that it was still early days since the funeral, my sister brought a lawyer and began discussing inheritance.
You live overseas, so you don't need an inheritance. I took care of our mother until the end, so you understand, don't you?
It seems that my sister already knows the amount of money that my mother left behind. Since she brought a lawyer, I didn't think she wanted to argue with me.
But if I take everything, it would be bad for our reputation. I'll give you the old house where our grandparents lived.
That's the house that was in for over 100 years. I remember my mother managing it after our grandparents passed away. However, my mother never told me about it directly. According to the lawyer, after my father died, my mother lost her motivation and didn't manage the house very well. Since I don't know the details of the situation, the lawyer said I could abandon it. Is she exaggerating the story to make me abandon it? I had my doubts, but no matter how terrible the situation was, if my mother had managed the house as long as she had the strength, I wanted to inherit it. I agreed to my sister's proposal. This was the only inheritance I received. In contrast, my sister inherited the family home, land, and all of my mother's savings. The house that I inherited was a place where I used to play a lot when I was a child, running around the natural surroundings and playing hide and seek. My sister hated our grandparents' house. She hated the old-fashioned, bug-infested countryside. Also, the house was dimly lit even during the day and had too many things, so she was scared and didn't want to approach it. For me, it was a place with only good memories, but for my sister, it was a place she didn't want to touch, so I thought she pushed it on me. That's because after my mother became unable to manage it, I expected it to be in a state of disrepair for quite some time, but I didn't think it would be this bad. First of all, the weeds around it are taller than me. They block my view, and even if I try to go inside, the branches and roots that have grown as they please block my way. The state of disrepair can be predicted to some extent without even checking the condition of the house. Still, I need to check it carefully. I thought I could do it by hand at first, whether it could be saved, repaired, or needed to be demolished because it was collapsing to the point of causing trouble to the neighbors, but I couldn't do anything at all. I can't imagine how much time and effort it would take if I did it alone. Anyway, I asked a contractor to remove the overgrown weeds and trees so that I could reach the house in the back. I received a call that the removal of the specified area was completed later. I went back to my grandparents' house again and was able to see the house itself. I realized that I had to demolish it because I couldn't say that the condition of the outer layer was good. The inside was worse than I expected from the outside. The floor was rotten, and there were holes in the ceiling. Rainwater seeped in from there and rotted the floor. There were also places where my weight made a loud creaking sound, and I judged that it would be difficult to carefully look around all the rooms. At a glance, it feels like the things inside the house are more organized than I remember from my childhood. My mother must have been gradually organizing things in the house until she got sick after inheriting it. Still, there are many pieces of furniture and small items left. I think it's okay to leave them as they are since I'm going to demolish and dispose of them, but I still want to clean up as much as possible before doing so. When I asked a contractor, they said it would take a few days at the earliest, and maybe a few weeks. Since the surrounding trees were in the way of bringing in heavy machinery, I decided to start by clearing them out. I will visit my grandparents' house as much as possible on sunny days while waiting for the demolition to take place in a few weeks. One day, while cleaning up around the kitchen, I found that many cooking utensils and dishes were left untouched, as if they were deemed necessary for daily life. Although there was no food left, there were a few unopened seasonings that had passed their expiration dates. I wondered if there was anything under the floorboards, so I opened the storage space. As expected, containers emerged. My grandmother used to make pickles and other things herself. Her homemade pickles were especially delicious, and there was a time when she would send them to me regularly even after I stopped visiting. I couldn't believe there were still pickles left, but I tried to lift the container to check, and it was quite heavy. Moreover, it was certain that something was inside. I opened the lid with fear and trembling, wondering if it was really something that had been pickled, and what came out were various gold items. There were also documents with them, and it turned out that they were things my grandparents had purchased with the money they obtained from selling land. Although I inherited my grandparents' house, is it okay to take the gold items that were inside the house? I didn't want to tell my sister because it would cause a commotion, so I decided to consult with my mother's sister, my aunt. According to my aunt, it is true that my grandparents sold part of the land that had been passed down from generation to generation during their time. The only land remaining is where my grandparents' house stands. My aunt is also ill and unable to organize the house, so she said she would leave everything to me since I inherited the house. As for the gold items, She said she would give them to me as a hassle and inconvenience fee if I took care of everything. Actually, it costs tens of thousands of dollars to demolish the old house. It doesn't work to say that I will pay from the money I get from selling the land, so I decided to accept my aunt's proposal. Since gold is currently in high demand, I will use the money I get from selling the gold items to pay for the demolition costs, removal of weeds around the house, and disposal of unwanted items inside the house. I got more money than I expected when I exchanged the gold items for cash. On the day of the demolition, I decided to watch until the end. For me, it was a memory of my grandparents from my childhood, and for my aunt, it was also the house where she was born and raised. My aunt, who was watching next to me, said quietly,
"I'm sorry, I left it like this until it became so dilapidated."
I told my aunt, "That's not true. I'm sure Grandpa, Grandma, and Mom would say thank you for seeing it through to the end," and she said it was good that her niece inherited it in the end. Just that made me feel relieved that I had accomplished what my mother had left undone. When everything was settled, I returned to my husband waiting overseas. The following year after my mother passed away, I returned temporarily with my husband for a family gathering. It was the first time I met my sister since the one-sided discussion about inheritance. After everything was done, my sister asked me,
"What happened to that old shack?"
I explained that I had no reason to hide it and that I had demolished it and sold the land. The land where my grandparents' house stood was quite spacious when it was cleared, and a buyer was found immediately. Then my sister's expression changed, and she said,
"I didn't hear that story."
She demanded that I give her half of the money if I sold it and turned it into cash.
"If I knew that such a dilapidated house could be turned into money, I wouldn't have let you inherit it,"
she said. It's true that a dilapidated house alone wouldn't be worth much. It's the result of investing the appropriate amount to turn it into a profitable piece of land. However, I didn't say that I had exchanged the gold items left by my grandparents for cash and used them to pay for the expenses. If I did, she would demand that I give her that portion as well. I firmly refused my sister's request. It was an unequal inheritance from the beginning. I don't think I have to share the money I earned from selling it successfully with my sister. If she wants half, she should give me half of what she inherited first. However, my sister, who apparently couldn't forgive me for expressing my opinion, began to say unjustly that I had obtained the money without permission in front of other relatives. When my aunt heard that, she protected me by saying that she was the one who asked to close the family home. She completely took my side and refuted my sister, who then lost her temper and pushed my aunt, saying,
"Outsiders, stay out of this. Don't interfere in the sisters' conversation."
My aunt dodged and fell down. When I blamed my sister, saying, "What are you doing?" she shifted the blame to me, saying that I was the one who did something wrong. Furthermore, she suggested,
"Let's talk about it between the sisters and our husbands. The fallen granny is in the way."
My husband and I faced my sister and her husband in another room. First, my husband explained how I had worked hard to close the family home. I stayed in the United States until the sale of the land was completed, leaving my husband, who couldn't return home for a long time due to work, behind. It was good that a buyer was found earlier than expected, but if not, there would have been additional hassle of returning home frequently. Although it is a job that can be done anywhere as long as there is an internet environment and a computer, It is not so easy to have my convenience prioritized all the time. There are also exchanges with my husband, who is in a different time zone, and to be honest, it was not easy. My husband also tells my sister that I invested an appropriate amount of money before demolishing the house. If she insists on half, he said it's only fair to split the expenses as well. I said that the story starts from there and that I don't intend to give her half of the sold land. After all, my sister has inherited more than the amount of money I got from selling the land. Furthermore, what does she mean by demanding more? I asked. From the beginning, my mother's inheritance was not divided equally. It is difficult to divide the land equally, but couldn't she have split the savings my mother left behind? I told them my true feelings that I couldn't say at that time. If there was any dissatisfaction with the amount of money, they could have consulted with me. Then my sister's husband asked,
"How much did my wife inherit in the first place?"
My husband and I were surprised and asked, "What?" It seems that my sister did not tell her husband the amount she inherited. Her husband was surprised to learn the amount and asked what she had done with such a large sum of money. Apparently, the amount has already disappeared, and he didn't even know it existed. I can't believe that such a large sum of money would disappear in a year or so. Of course, I don't know if she bought a house with it, but after my mother passed away, my sister returned to her husband's place. If my sister makes a big purchase like a house, her husband should already have asked where the money came from. At first, my sister tried to dodge the question or change the subject, but her seemingly gentle husband pounded the table and questioned her, so my sister, feeling fearful, confessed in a mosquito-like voice that she had used the money to pay off her debt. Furthermore, since there is still an outstanding balance, she seems to want the money I received from selling the land. What kind of debt is it that can't be repaid with that inheritance amount? If I listen carefully, it seems that she lost a lot of money in illegal gambling and the debt ballooned to the point where she could buy only one house. The unpaid debt is compounded daily with illegal interest, and she cries out for help because it's hopeless. First of all, my sister is a housewife and doesn't even work part-time. Her husband naturally asked her where she got the money from. It turned out that she had taken it out of their savings. He checked the balance in a hurry, but it was zero, and her husband was furious that it had been used without his knowledge. Her husband grabbed and pushed my sister down. My sister resisted and scratched her husband with her nails. It developed into a small brawl and was subdued by relatives in another room. My aunt confronted my sister, saying,
"You've been taking things of value from your parents' home, haven't you? Your mother knew about it. And since there's no time left, she asked you to contact the other daughter, but you didn't do it."
She presented a letter written in my mother's handwriting. When I asked why such a thing was coming up now, my aunt said that she wanted to keep this to herself in her heart, hoping that everything would be settled and redone after my sister took all the money and cleared everything. However, she had the disgusting thought process of wanting to squeeze more money out of the inheritance and not rehabilitating. My aunt confessed to my sister, hoping that she would realize how terrible she had been. There were also ancestral heirlooms that my mother had cherished among the things my sister took out and exchanged for cash. Later, my sister was unilaterally divorced by her husband. He demanded that she agree to it, or he would claim the entire amount she had embezzled. However, immediately afterward, a document demanding compensation for damages arrived. The debt she incurred from the dangerous gambling she did was borrowed from a really dangerous place, and I heard that she is being chased no matter where she goes. My sister, who has never worked properly, started working part-time, but she can't repay the debt with such a job, and she is being threatened to do a dangerous and profitable job. If she does that, she will be convicted immediately. It's my sister's own fault that she can't handle money that is appropriate for her income. I returned to the United States when my husband's job moved to the United States. I bought a house with the money I got from selling the land on the way. We live happily as a couple in that house. My job is going well, and my aunt comes to check on me from time to time. Recently, her health has been good, and she's regaining my strength. I hope this happiness will continue forever.
How was this story? Please subscribe to the channel as well. See you in the next video.